Let me quickly show you the live pictures looking in to the Gaza Strip from southern Israel, and those pictures showing the plumes of smoke as Israel continues with its renewed offensive after the breakdown of that ceasefire. Let's speak now to Mark Regev, Senior Advisor to the Israeli Prime Minister. Mark Regev, welcome to the programme. Let me start by just reading you a quote from one Palestinian man in Rafah who said he was asleep in an area they told us was safe. At 10:20, they destroyed the entire block. There is no safe area. They are liars. They say it's safe. Let us seek refuge, and then they bomb. Just how do you respond to an everyday example of that being the real life experience?
I have no doubt that there's human suffering. Every war, unfortunately, brings human suffering. But I urge you to be cautious with those sort of reports coming out of Hamas-controlled territory. Hamas is not a democracy. Hamas is a brutal dictatorship. And people who do not follow the Hamas line either don't talk, and if they do talk, they pay a price. And so obviously anyone who's sending you messages out of Hamas-controlled territory has to follow the party line. It's all Israel's fault. Israel, according to Hamas, is only attacking civilians. We're blowing up buildings for no reason. That's what they want you to hear.
I'll come back to that final thought in a moment, but I've seen the grid that you've published today. One aid group has described that as turning life in the territory into a macabre game of battleships. Today, I think it is about 15 blocks around Khan Yunis that you've told people to leave. Roughly how many people is that, and how long are you giving them to actually get out?
So actually, this is part of Israel's effort to safeguard the civilian population, who we don't want to see caught up in the crossfire between the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, and the Hamas terrorists. And so we're urging them to leave areas of expected combat. And as you've said correctly, we're not talking about the entire city of Khan Yunis. We're talking about specific neighborhoods where there is Hamas infrastructure, tunnels, command and control, arsenals, where
sure,
we
but
need...
It's a large block, and what I'm just asking you is roughly how many people are you expecting to move, and how long have they got before those areas are targeted?
So I'm not going to tell you exactly when we move. That would be a mistake. Hamas would hear us as well. But they have enough time. They should move as quickly as they can, but they have enough time to move. And as you know, we have designated safer areas where they can move to. And we do not see the civilian population of Gaza as a target of our operation. On the contrary, we're making a maximum effort to safeguard them, to tell them, please, leave areas of expected combat. We don't want to see you caught up in the crossfire.
Sure. I mean, you keep saying you're making maximum effort to avoid civilian casualties. Just saying it doesn't make it true, does it?
But it is true. And I'm sure when the numbers when this is over and we know the actual numbers, I think you will see that Israel compares, the Israeli military compares very well, favorably, when compared to other militaries, including Western militaries, when they've fought terrorists in built-up areas. If you compare the ratio of civilians who've been caught up in the crossfire with, let's say, Western forces in places like Fallujah or Mosul, we will compare surprisingly well. And let's just wait before there are any sort of accusations to the contrary. Let's see the numbers.
In terms of your objectives, is your objective to destroy Hamas or destroy Gaza?
No, to destroy Hamas. And the truth is Gaza will be much better off without Hamas. Just as areas of Iraq and Syria that were controlled by ISIS are better off without ISIS.
We're showing pictures of around Khan Yunis and the utter destruction. We've seen similar images in the north. Are you sure when you say this is for the betterment of ordinary Palestinians, that is actually the case?
So I would ask you the following question. Hamas has been in power in Gaza for 16 years. And what is their record of government? What have they brought the people of Gaza? Misery, bloodshed, tragedy, and of course, poverty. Surely the people of Gaza deserve something better than this extreme terrorist organization that doesn't give a hoot for the well-being of the people of Gaza.
Sure.
Why did they start
Hamas
this war?
have to take responsibility for what they're doing. I'm simply asking, whether you're taking responsibility for what you're doing when you see pictures like that we've just been showing. You see the pictures from hospitals that are saying they're completely overwhelmed. You listen to UN workers on the ground saying nowhere is safe. I'm asking simply for you to take responsibility of the sorts of actions you're carrying out.
So I don't accept that nowhere is safe. We've designated safer zones for people to go to. And if you ask me if the pictures are difficult, of course the pictures are difficult. But what is happening underneath? You see, if you believe the Hamas propaganda, we're just hitting innocent buildings, right? But if we're hitting a structure, it's because there's Hamas either in or under the structure. But no one will tell you that because they live in fear of a Hamas bullet. We're dealing with an authoritarian regime that controls the words and the pictures coming out of Gaza. Have you seen, Sir Man, a single picture of a dead Hamas fighter in Khan Yunis? Of course not. So are there no dead Hamas fighters? Have we only been targeting civilians? Obviously not.
Well, let me ask you a question. Let me ask you a question about Hamas fighters, given that you talk about that, because I don't want to get into an argument because it's been well rehearsed about overall casualty figures. I know what Israel is saying about that. But in terms of the amount of Hamas fighters that Israel says it has killed, I think the Israeli Defense Ministry said it was somewhere in the middle between 1,000 and 10,000, and that 5,000 figure has been talked about. But how do you actually know that those are the numbers of Hamas militants you've killed?
So once again, you don't know for sure. When you destroy a tunnel, you don't know how many Hamas terrorists were inside the tunnel. And so we can only make approximations at this stage, and we're very, very careful with our numbers. Unlike the Hamas-controlled Ministry of Health, which is always putting out its numbers, and they're sure about their numbers, and yet in the documented cases that we've had so far, especially you'll recall the famous incident of the hospital in the north, Al-Ahli, where they said, what was it, 500, 800 people were killed, and in the end it was a fraction of that. Hamas has a deliberate strategy to inflate the numbers of casualties, and of course everyone is a civilian.
I'm simply asking about
your
judgment, your intelligence about Hamas fighters that you say you've killed. I'm not talking about what Hamas-controlled Gaza officials say. I'm asking about what your intelligence is telling you.
So I can tell you we've killed thousands of Hamas terrorists. And when the final numbers come out, when this war is over and the fog of war is behind us, I believe our performance will compare very favorably with that of Western armies in comparable situations. Don't judge us against perfection. We'll always fall short. Even though we strive, we don't want to see a single civilian casualty. We don't want to see a single child caught up in the crossfire. And every person who's lost their life unnecessarily, that's a tragedy.
Yeah.
But if you compare us with other Western armies in similar situations, sure, I think you'll find the IDF
You've made that point. So let me ask you another important question. Have you given up in terms of getting out the rest of the hostages because the negotiations have come to an end? You're pressing ahead with your military operations now in the south. Do you have any idea of where those hostages are? And actually, have you got any hope that the military operation is going to actually release them?
I think it's the only way, unfortunately. I mean, Hamas, as you know, is a brutal terrorist organization that it's not going to release the hostages because they've suddenly discovered that holding hostages is against international humanitarian law. Yes, they are a brutal and fanatical organization.
Sure, but the negotiations did result in over 100 hostages coming out.
Correct, but how did you, Matthew, how did you get that success? You had that success because Hamas was facing a very, very massive military pressure from the Israeli Defense Forces. As a result, they were desperate for a ceasefire. And as a result, they understood that the only way to have a pause in the fighting was to release hostages. And I think by beefing up our military pressure on Hamas today is the best way to ensure the release or the rescue of hostages further down the line. They're not going to release these hostages because they've suddenly become humanitarians. That has to be clear.
In terms of what you just said, beefing up your operations, what is the time frame roughly that you're talking about? Because certainly behind the scenes, all the reports suggest the Americans are urging you to actually say that you've got less time than perhaps you think you have.
So for Israel, this is a crucial issue. We have to get the job done, and we have to do it right, because a ceasefire that leaves Hamas in power is just a recipe for more fighting in the future. If you leave Hamas in power, they say publicly that they would do the October 7th massacre again and again and again. And so a Band-Aid solution is just that. It's a Band-Aid solution. We have to have a new reality.
But you accept you've only
over.
got perhaps weeks to actually complete the military side of this, given the way the international community is responding. You've seen what's coming out of Washington, all the recent remarks from Defence Secretary to Vice President to Antony Blinken.
So I've been in meetings with those American officials, and I know what the American position is. And we see eye to eye that Israel has the right to defend itself. We see eye to eye that Hamas can no longer remain the governor of the Gaza Strip, and they have to be removed. And we will do that in a way that is as surgical as possible in accordance with international law, where our response will be proportional. And we will continue to distinguish between combatants, that's the Hamas terrorists, and the civilian population who, as you've just reported, we are making a maximum effort to get them out of combat zones.
Mark Regev, we have to leave it there, but thanks very much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.